Our tragic story begins with a panicked phone call to Sydney police on July 10, 2001. 20-year-old Sef Gonzales cries out that he's returned home to find a gruesome scene. His mother, father, and sister have been brutally murdered. Racist graffiti is scrawled on the walls. Who could have committed such a heinous crime against this religious Filipino-Australian family? As the investigation unfolds, suspicion turns to Sef himself. Could this baby-faced son have slaughtered his own family in cold blood? Let's uncover this chilling true crime story of the Gonzalez family murders. The Gonzalez family. The Gonzalez family lived what seemed an ideal life in the quiet Sydney suburb of North Ryde. Parents Teddy and Mary had emigrated from the Philippines in the 1990s, following an earthquake that uprooted their comfortable lives there. Despite this, they built a successful life in Australia. Teddy worked as an immigration lawyer, while Mary was the secretary at the family firm. Their two children, 20-year-old Sef and 18-year-old Claudine, were both students. The family were devout and active members of their local Catholic church, and from the outside the Gonzalez family appeared close-knit. But behind closed doors the household was brewing in tension. Teddy and Mary had high hopes and strict expectations for their children, particularly Sef. They wanted him to excel academically, but his ability and interest never matched the demands they had. After attending Parramatta Marist High School, Sef enrolled in medical science at the University of New South Wales, but withdrew after 2 years due to poor performance. He then switched to studying law at Macquarie University. Secretly, Sef was an aspiring celebrity who dreamed of fame and fortune through a career in the entertainment industry. He harbored fantasies of his stardom and traits that many suggested was full-blown narcissism, including a compulsive tendency to lie. In one telling example of this troubling behavior, he falsely convinced his friends that he was dying from cancer. His meek disposition and apparent sincerity often made his claims seem believable. Sef's grades continued to suffer with his law degree, putting him at risk of expulsion. Rather than seek help for his academic struggles, Sef resorted to falsifying his grades in an attempt to deceive his parents. When Sef's sister exposed his lies, his parents threatened to take away privileges like use of his beloved green Ford Festiva. Arguments with his mother Mary over a girlfriend she disapproved of only further fanned the flames of rage Sef had internalized. The threat of being disinherited from the family's assets was the blow to his ego and sense of entitlement that descended into an evil plot to slaughter his family. The murders. On the evening of July 10th, Sef put his sinister plan into action. Armed with a baseball bat and kitchen knives, he lay in wait for his family to come home. Sister Claudine was first to arrive around 4:30 p.m. and went to her room to study. Sef followed, bludgeoning her with the bat and stabbing her repeatedly. Claudine suffered devastating head injuries and stab wounds to her neck and torso. Sef's frenzied attack left her dead in a pool of blood. An hour later, Mary arrived home from work. As she entered the house, Sef ambushed his mother in a surprise attack, stabbing her multiple times. She suffered gruesome wounds to her face, neck, chest, and stomach. Sef slashed her throat so viciously her windpipe was dissected. Mary's body was found in the living room. Teddy, the family patriarch, was last to arrive home around 6:50 p.m. Sef repeated his pattern, viciously stabbing his father as soon as he walked through the door. Teddy was knifed in the neck, chest, back, and abdomen, his lung punctured and spinal cord severed. Signs of a struggle suggested Teddy tried to fight back against his son to no avail. He became the third and final victim of Sef's killing spree. The cover-up. With his family lying dead, Sef set about covering his tracks. He took the murder weapons and his blood-stained clothes and shoes and disposed of them. He showered and changed. To disguise the killings as a hate crime, Sef spray painted the walls with the words, "Golf Asians KKK." He then left the house, driving to a friend's place. The two spent the evening having dinner and playing video games in the city. establishing Sef's alibi. It wasn't until 11:48 p.m. that Sef called emergency services in a panic, claiming to have just discovered the bodies. Police initially took the scene and testimony of Sef at face value, assuming it was a racially motivated home invasion turned deadly. The brutal nature of the crime and the hateful graffiti left them fearing a killer was on the loose, ready to strike another Asian family. The community was gripped with dread, but some things didn't add up. For an alleged robbery, little of value had actually been stolen from the house. And if it were a frenzied attack of hate, why would intruders remain in the home for over 3 hours to commit the murders? Investigators slowly turned their attention to Sef. Sef's suspicious behavior. The 20-year-old played the part of the grieving son. He made tearful television appeals for the killers to come forward. At the family's funeral, he gave an emotional eulogy and sang "One Sweet Day" by Boyz II Men. But behind the scenes, Sef's behavior was suspicious. He appeared detached and matter-of-fact when discussing the killings. Just days after losing his family, he was asking about the size of his inheritance, estimated at over $1.5 million. He moved into a fancy new apartment and put a deposit on a $173,000 Lexus, claiming he would use his expected inheritance to pay for it. Sef's stories to police were inconsistent. He couldn't adequately explain his whereabouts during the hours before the murders. The evidence started to stack up against him. Previous poisoning attempts. Nearly a year after the killings, in June 2002, police had enough to arrest Sef and charge him with 3 counts of murder. Remarkably, earlier investigations uncovered a previous plot by Sef to poison his family. His browser history showed that he had researched toxic plants online and ordered poisonous seeds. A container of a plant-based poison was subsequently found in his room. Incidentally, Sef's mother Mary had fallen violently ill with food poisoning 3 months before the murders, suggesting a likely attempt run by Sef. With the poisoning attempts proving unsuccessful, Sef settled on a more decisive plan of attack against his family. The trial. Sef's murder trial began in May 2004. Prosecutors argued that he was driven by greed and resentment to kill his family. As the sole remaining heir, he was set to inherit his parents' estate and life insurance payouts, which served as the primary motivation for murder. They portrayed Sef as a narcissist and pathological liar who had been enraged at his family's attempts to control his life. He wanted freedom from their high expectations and discipline over his failing university grades. Slaughtering his family would get Sef the fortune and celebrity he craved. The prosecution case was strong. Substantial evidence supported the poisoning allegations. Paint matching the graffiti was found on Sef's clothes. Sef's alibis for the hours before the murders quickly fell apart under scrutiny. A taxi driver and sex worker he claimed to have been with were located by police, and both denied being with Sef that day. It became clear that Sef had ample opportunity to carry out the murders in the early evening before establishing his alibi with a friend. After a trial lasting just over 2 weeks, the jury deliberated for 3 days before finding Sef Gonzales guilty on all charges. The judge handed down 3 life sentences for the murders, to be served concurrently with no possibility of parole. In his sentencing remarks, Justice Bruce James described the crimes as being in the worst category, with no mitigating factors to lessen Sef's culpability. He found Sef had carefully planned the murders and carried them out with extreme brutality. The judge said a life sentence was the only appropriate punishment for Sef's heinous crimes. Aftermath and reflections. Sef has always maintained his innocence. His lawyers launched an appeal in 2007, claiming some of his police interview statements may have been inadmissible as he wasn't cautioned. However, the appeal was dismissed as causing no substantial miscarriage of justice. In 2018 and 2019, Sef applied for a judicial review of his convictions, but these applications were also denied. A third attempt in 2021 was once again rejected by the courts. Now in his 40s, Sef Gonzales remains behind bars, serving his life sentence at the Galburn Correctional Center. Barring a major development, he will likely spend the rest of his days in prison. The Gonzalez family murders are remembered as one of the most shocking crimes in Australian history. That a son could so viciously slaughter his own mother, father, and sister was unthinkable to most. Sef's lack of remorse and shameless greed after the killings only added to the public revulsion. His attempts to frame it as a hate crime exploited community fears and prejudices. In the end, Sef's own lies and inconsistencies became his undoing, leading police to the truth. While nothing can bring back those he killed, there is some justice in knowing Sef Gonzales will never walk free again. For the extended family left behind, the murders brought unimaginable grief. Sef's aunt, Emily Luna, spoke of still loving her nephew despite his evil acts. How does a family ever recover from a trauma of this magnitude? They were left to carry on without three of their most cherished members, and to reconcile the boy they thought they knew with the cold-blooded killer he became. The Gonzalez family, by all accounts, were good people, loving, hardworking, and devoted to their faith. They didn't deserve their cruel fate at the hands of the son they raised. Questions linger as to whether more could have been done to help Sef before he resorted to murder. A family friend reported that Teddy had confided in him about Sef's problems at university a year before the killings. Teddy had been at his wits' end trying to deal with his son's lies and rebellious behavior. In many ways, Sef displayed classic signs of a troubled teen spiraling out of control. The deception, the narcissism, the rejection of his family's values. Could earlier intervention have pulled Sef back from the brink? Or was he always destined for evil, his murderous nature hidden behind a baby face and charming smile? In our next case, we delve into the story of Stacey Castor, also known as the Black Widow. This chilling story begins with a woman whose outward charm masked inner darkness. Stacey Castor, a seemingly devoted wife and mother, would become known as the Black Widow, leaving a trail of death and deception in her wake. Over the span of a few short years, both of Castor's husbands would die under mysterious circumstances, followed by the near-fatal poisoning of her own daughter in a desperate attempt to conceal her crimes. A woman who sacrificed the lives of those closest to her all to satisfy her own greed and hunger for control. A master manipulator, Castor almost got away with murder, if not for the tireless efforts of detectives who saw through her web of lies. This is the story of the Black Widow, a woman whose cold-blooded crimes shocked a community and captured the morbid fascination of a nation. Early life of Stacey Castor. Stacey Castor was born Stacey Ruth Daniels on July 24, 1967, in the small town of Weedsport, New York. From the outside, her early life appeared relatively normal and stable. As a young woman, Stacey worked as an office manager, and in 1988, she married her first husband, Michael Wallace. The couple went on to have two daughters together, Ashley, born in 1988, and Bree, born a few years later in 1991. But behind closed doors, the Wallace marriage was far from idyllic. Stacey and Michael worked opposite shifts to make ends meet, with her on the day shift as an ambulance dispatcher and him working nights as a mechanic. Friends would later recall that Michael struggled with substance abuse, which put a strain on the relationship. The couple had even discussed the possibility of getting a divorce, but that never came to pass. On the afternoon of January 11, 2000, a shocking discovery occurred. 38-year-old Michael Wallace was found unresponsive on the living room sofa by his father-in-law. He was rushed to the hospital, but soon pronounced dead. An autopsy determined he had died of a heart attack, and no foul play was suspected at the time. Stacey was now a widow at age 32 with two young daughters to support. Marriage to David Castor. Just 8 months after losing her first husband, Stacey married 41-year-old David Castor, a man she had been introduced to through her boss in 2021. David was the owner of an air conditioning company where Stacy worked. From the outside, they appeared to be a happy, prosperous couple, living a comfortable life in the suburbs of Syracuse, New York. But the marriage quickly became troubled. Heated arguments and alleged infidelity became a feature of their tumultuous relationship, and again, talks of divorce began to spring up. One can also speculate that domestic issues had become abusive. David confided in family members that he slept with his bedroom door locked because he feared his wife. The investigation and shocking discovery. On August 22, 2005, came a disturbing replay of events. In a frantic 911 call, Stacy told the operator she was worried her husband David had locked himself in their bedroom and committed suicide. Responding officers had to break down the locked door. Inside, they found 48-year-old David Castor lying naked and unresponsive on the bed. He was pronounced dead at the scene. At the home, detectives made a series of odd discoveries. A short glass tumbler filled with a bright green liquid rested on David's nightstand, alongside a bottle of antifreeze. A turkey baster was also found in the kitchen garbage. David's body was sent for an autopsy and toxicology testing. Meanwhile, investigators began delving into Stacy's background and examining the eerie similarities between the deaths of her two husbands. As suspicions mounted, detectives made the decision to exhume the body of Stacy's first husband, Michael Wallace, for testing, producing a shocking revelation. New toxicology tests revealed his body contained lethal levels of ethylene glycol, a key ingredient in automotive antifreeze. Chronic exposure to ethylene glycol can mimic symptoms of a heart attack. Investigators now had evidence that both of Stacy Castor's husbands had suspiciously died from the same form of poisoning. The ultimate betrayal. With law enforcement closing in and fearing she would soon be discovered, Stacy Castor took the unthinkable step of trying to eliminate the one person she feared could implicate her in the murders: her own 19-year-old daughter, Ashley. In a sickening twist, Stacy staged an apparent murder-suicide, poisoning Ashley with a lethal cocktail of alcohol and crushed pills mixed in a drink. She then typed out a 750-word suicide note on the family computer, claiming to be written by Ashley. In the note, Ashley purportedly confessed to killing both her father and stepfather, and was now taking her own life, unable to bear the crushing guilt any longer. On the morning of September 14, 2007, Ashley was found comatose in her bed by her younger sister Bree. She had a black eye, bruises on her arms, and was frothing at the mouth. Rushed to the hospital in critical condition, doctors said Ashley was only minutes from death. Doctors pumped her stomach and put her in a medically induced coma to reduce the swelling in her brain. Miraculously, Ashley survived the attempt on her life. When she regained consciousness, she was adamant she had not tried to kill herself and had no memory of writing a suicide note. Computer forensic analysis soon confirmed the suicide note had been written by Stacy Castor, not Ashley. The timestamp showed it was typed on the family computer during a 10-minute window when cell phone records proved Ashley was passed out in her bed. Investigators also found evidence of Stacy researching fatal doses of alcohol and drugs in the days before Ashley's poisoning. The pieces of the sinister puzzle were falling into place. The arrest. In 2007, Stacy Castor was arrested and charged with second-degree murder for the death of her second husband, David Castor, and attempted murder for the poisoning of her daughter, Ashley Wallace. Facing serious charges, she turned to defense attorney Chuck Keller for help. Keller planned to argue that Ashley was actually the one responsible for David's death, and that she had also tried to take her own life. However, prosecutor William Fitzpatrick was confident in the evidence against Castor. The case had many strong forensic elements that pointed to her guilt: computer data, DNA, and expert analysis of the faked suicide note. Fitzpatrick was determined to make sure all of this evidence was presented clearly to secure a conviction against Castor. Prosecutors argued she was motivated by greed, hoping to cash in on David's life insurance money. They believed she also killed her first husband, Michael Wallace, for the same reason back in 2000, although she was never officially charged with his death. The Black Widow Trial. In January 2009, the so-called Black Widow went on trial in a case that captured national attention. The prosecution's case was damning. They had Stacy's fingerprints on the antifreeze bottle and glass in David's room. They had computer forensic evidence proving she forged the phony suicide note. But most powerful of all, they had the emotional testimony of Ashley Wallace herself, telling the jury how her own mother had tried to kill her and frame her for murder. Throughout the trial, Stacy Castor maintained her innocence, adamantly suggesting that Ashley was the real killer. But her desperate attempts to shift blame on her daughter fell flat. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning a unanimous verdict of guilt on all counts. Stacy Castor, the Black Widow, was sentenced to the maximum penalty of 51 years to life in prison. She would not be eligible for parole until age 87. In a final statement to the court, Castor acknowledged the evidence against her was substantial, but stopped short of admitting guilt, saying only, "I must bear responsibility." She said she accepted her punishment in the hopes it would allow her family to heal. But for Ashley Wallace, the wounds inflicted by her mother's ultimate betrayal would last a lifetime. As she addressed the court at Castor's sentencing, Ashley said through tears, "She took away the only person in the world that I had. She was my best friend, and she tried to kill me. I wish she would say sorry for everything she did." Even after being found guilty and sentenced to 51 years in prison, Stacy Castor refused to admit she had done anything wrong. From her prison cell at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, she continued to claim she was innocent of killing her husbands and trying to murder her daughter Ashley. In a TV interview after the trial, Castor said she was shocked by the verdict and blamed Ashley for what happened. She showed some sympathy for her younger daughter Bray, calling her an innocent victim, but expressed no remorse for her crimes. Castor's own mother and stepfather stood by her. However, both Ashley and Bree were relieved by the guilty verdict. They cut off contact with their mother, deeply hurt that she never apologized. Psychiatrist Dr. James Knoll explained that Castor fits the profile of a Black Widow-type killer who murders husbands for financial gain, rather than a typical serial killer. He noted that if guilty, Castor's lack of remorse and willingness to sacrifice her own child to protect herself showed psychopathic traits. Knoll said killers like Castor will deny to the bitter end, unable to ever admit the truth, even to themselves. Stacy Castor died of a heart attack in her prison cell on June 11, 2016 at the age of 48. She took any secrets about her husband's murders with her to the grave. In the end, this woman who tore apart her own family in the most vicious way possible died alone in a prison cell, forever branded as the Black Widow. The Black Widow's story is about more than just the evil that one woman was capable of. It's also about the dogged pursuit of justice to bring a killer to account, and the strength of a daughter who survived the ultimate maternal betrayal. Ashley Wallace endured unspeakable trauma, but refused to let it define her. She found the courage to stand up to her mother and help ensure she would never harm anyone else. Today, Ashley Wallace has rebuilt her life. She is married and focused on moving forward, but the scars of her past remain. As she said after her mother's conviction, "I know that I didn't do anything wrong. As hard as it is to get up every day and put a smile on my face, I know that I have to. Because if I don't, then Stacy won. The Black Widow may be gone, but for her daughter, the struggle to heal from her poison continues." Ashley Wallace is the true survivor of this tragic tale. In our next case, we uncover the ongoing tragedy of the Shaka cult massacre. The tragic story of the Shaka cult massacre begins in the Kilifi region of southeastern Kenya. In early 2023, hundreds of followers of the Good News International Church, led by the charismatic pastor Paul McKenzie and Thinge, gathered in the remote Shaka forest. McKenzie had promised his devotees a path to salvation. By starving themselves to death, they would meet Jesus and avoid damnation in the impending apocalypse he prophesied. But instead of divine deliverance, the faithful found only suffering and death. By the time authorities intervened in April 2023, a shocking 400-plus bodies had been exhumed from mass graves, with hundreds more followers still missing. The Shaka cult massacre would become one of the worst tragedies caused by religious extremism in modern times. This is the chilling story of how one man's toxic ideology led hundreds to their graves. The rise of Paul McKenzie's cult. Paul McKenzie Enthenge seemed an unlikely cult leader. The former taxi driver founded the Good News International Church in 2003 in the coastal town of Malindi. His passionate sermons and charismatic style quickly drew a devoted following among the region's poor and uneducated population. But McKenzie's teachings grew increasingly radical over the years. He preached that education was evil and demanded followers remove their children from school. He denounced modern medicine and government institutions as satanic. More bizarrely, McKenzie eventually claimed that he was a prophet who spoke directly to God. Among others, 39-year-old Titus Katana, an ex-follower of the Kenyan cult leader, broke away from McKenzie's church following the introduction of some of these increasingly intrusive and corrupted laws. His creed even began attracting police attention. McKenzie was arrested in 2017 on charges of radicalization, but was later acquitted. By 2019, he was arrested again for possessing film material intended to incite hatred against practitioners of other religions, including Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam. Despite controversy surrounding his inflammatory rhetoric, his sermons continued to proliferate through his community and took on a more apocalyptic tone. With the church under more scrutiny from rights groups and authorities, an undeterred McKenzie relocated with many of his followers to a plot of land he owned in the isolated Shaka forest. There, far from prying eyes, McKenzie's cult descended into full-blown religious extremism. He declared the Shaka forest a holy land and even dubbed it New Jerusalem. Adherents were told to cut all ties with the outside world, a world which McKenzie deemed irredeemably corrupt. The settlement. Life in the Shaka cult settlement was strictly regimented. The estimated 800 to 1,000 residents were separated into self-contained communities with biblical names like Judea, Bethlehem, Galilee, Samaria, Capernaum, Emmaus, and Nazareth. Cult members were compelled to surrender all their possessions and subsist communally off the land. Modern clothing was prohibited in favor of simple robes. Communication with all outsiders, including family, was forbidden. McKenzie himself lived in a large compound in Judea containing 3 houses and a gazebo, where he would hold meetings with church officials. Armed thugs helped McKenzie exert control over his congregation, and his inner circle of trusted lieutenants enforced his increasingly draconian edicts. McKenzie instructed his followers to destroy all documents given by the government, including national IDs and birth certificates. The combined threat of wild animals and men with guns kept people confined to their homes, and they would only gather twice a month under a tree in their village to be led in prayer by their designated preacher. McKenzie's word was law, and any perceived disloyalty was harshly punished. McKenzie's Doomsday revelation. The true depths of McKenzie's malevolent designs were yet to be revealed. In early 2023, the self-proclaimed prophet claimed to have received a revelation from God during a 40-day fast in the wilderness. Doomsday was fast approaching, McKenzie preached, and the only path to salvation was through starvation. He ordered his followers to follow a fasting schedule, starting with the children, single people, married women, and then married men, to intake no food or water, with the promise of meeting Jesus in the afterlife. McKenzie and his family would go last. McKenzie assured the faithful that their suffering would not only save their own souls, but serve as an atonement for the world's sins in the end times. He invoked the biblical motif of sacrifice, and twisted it to his own dark ends. Some cult members, so thoroughly indoctrinated and cut off from reality, willingly embraced McKenzie's apocalyptic vision. Parents watched their own children waste away, forbidden from intervening lest they interfere with the divine plan. As the death toll mounted, McKenzie's deputies buried the bodies in shallow graves scattered throughout the forest. But even in the throes of starvation, survival instincts kicked in, and some followers managed to break free from McKenzie's psychological grip. In March 2023, a small group of emaciated women and children emerged from the forest, seeking food and medical attention in nearby villages. Their shocking condition and stories of mass starvation quickly reached the authorities. The horrific discovery. On April 14th, a multi-agency team, including police, medics, and aid workers, entered the Shaka Hola forest on a rescue mission. What they encountered was a scene of unimaginable horror. Scattered among the 9 settlements were mass graves, some with the bodies of children still clinging to their deceased mothers. Survivors were little more than living skeletons. Over the following weeks, the scale of the atrocity came into focus. Forensic teams painstakingly exhumed 427 bodies in total, a somber procession of victims, men, women, and children, who had starved to death or been strangled or bludgeoned by the cult enforcers. Over 600 people were still unaccounted for, likely buried in yet undiscovered graves. Aftermath and investigation. The horrific discovery of mass graves in the Shaka Hola forest sent shockwaves through Kenya and the international community. As authorities began to unravel the extent of the atrocities committed by Paul McKenzie and the Good News International Church, the nation grappled with the difficult questions that arose in the wake of such a tragedy. McKenzie and his associates were swiftly arrested, and the investigation into their activities began in earnest. The pastor, who had a history of radical preaching and run-ins with the law, now faced the most serious charges of his life. In December 2023, in a separate case, McKenzie was sentenced to 18 months in prison by the Malindi court for illegally distributing films and operating a film studio without a valid license from the Kenya Film Classification Board. However, this conviction paled in comparison to the heinous crimes he was accused of in relation to the Shaka Hola cult massacre. As the investigation progressed, the extent of the psychological and physical abuse within the cult became increasingly clear. McKenzie and dozens of his associates faced a litany of charges, including murder, terrorism, manslaughter, assault, radicalization, engaging in organized criminal activity, cruelty to a child, facilitating the commission of a terrorist act, and child torture. The evidence against them mounted, painting a picture of a cult leader who had wielded his influence to devastating effect. Despite the gravity of the accusations against him, McKenzie remained defiant. He claimed that the starvation was God's will and that the authorities were persecuting him for his faith. This stance only served to underscore the depth of his delusion and the extent to which he had manipulated his followers. In January 2024, the case against McKenzie and his associates reached a critical point. McKenzie and 94 others were charged with terrorism-related crimes in connection with the deaths of 429 followers. The scale of the tragedy was almost incomprehensible, and the nation struggled to come to terms with how such a thing could have happened. By February 2024, the focus of the investigation had turned to the most vulnerable victims of the cult's activities: the children. McKenzie and 29 others were charged with the murder of 191 children found buried in the forest. The revelation that so many young lives had been lost sent a wave of grief and anger through the nation. As the investigation continued and more details emerged about the inner workings of the cult, the Kenyan government and public were forced to confront difficult questions. How had McKenzie, a man with a documented history of dangerous radicalization, been allowed to operate unchecked for so long? Why did hundreds of people follow him into the wilderness to their doom? Investigators pointed to the desperate socioeconomic conditions in the region as a key factor in the tragedy. McKenzie had preyed on the poor and uneducated, promising them divine salvation from their earthly misery. His message of a corrupt, doomed world had found fertile ground among those with little hope, and the cult had provided a sense of purpose and community, even as it destroyed them. Others highlighted the lax regulation of Kenya's mushrooming religious movements as a contributing factor. The rise of predatory figures like McKenzie have been enabled by a system that struggled to balance religious freedom with the need to curb extremism. The tragedy in Shaka Hola had brought this issue into sharp focus, and there were calls for greater oversight of religious institutions, lessons, and reflections. As a shocked nation mourned the senseless loss of life in Shaka Hola, the government vowed reforms. President William Ruto established a task force to review the rules governing religious institutions. Prosecutors built a wide-ranging case against McKenzie and his accomplices, aiming to secure justice for the hundreds of lives stolen. But for the survivors and the families of the deceased, the scars run deep. Parents bury children whose last moments were filled with confusion and agony. Widows and orphans piece together shattered lives, their loved ones stolen by a cruel lie. A community tries to fathom how their neighbors descended into such darkness. The Shaka Hola forest, once a place of unspeakable suffering, has become a somber memorial. Rows of simple wooden crosses mark the graves of the cult's victims, a testament to the lives cut short by one man's twisted vision. Mourners leave flowers and keepsakes, grasping for some way to process the incomprehensible. As the wheels of justice turn and the nation reflects, the story of the Shaka Hola cult massacre stands as a chilling reminder of the insidious power of religious extremism and reverence of cult figures. How an ideology in the wrong hands can lead the vulnerable down a path of destruction, and how eternal vigilance is the price of preventing such tragedies. The scars of Shaka Hola will linger long in Kenya's memory. But in the end, the truth prevailed over McKenzie's web of deadly lies. The brave survivors who sounded the alarm, the dedicated rescuers who faced the horror head-on, and the investigators who untangled the cult's secrets are the guardians of light against the darkness. As the victims are laid to rest and the perpetrators face judgment, Kenya is left to ponder the hard lessons of the Shaka Hola tragedy. How to balance faith and freedom, community and individuality, hope and discernment. They are questions with no easy answers, but ones that demand attention lest the mistakes of the past be repeated. For the lives lost to the Shaka Hola cult, there is no true justice to be had. They cannot be brought back from the grave. But in their memory, in the tears shed for them, and the reforms enacted in their name, there is a chance for meaning to grow from the depths of meaningless suffering. A chance to build a world where the light of truth outshines the false prophets. As Kenya mourns and rebuilds, these are the values that light the way forward. The values that ensure the victims of Shaka Hola will never be forgotten, and their fate never repeated. In this next case, we turn to the cruel murder of Alexa Bartell. Imagine a young woman, just 20 years old, driving home from work on a quiet spring night. She's chatting and laughing with a friend on the phone, her whole life still ahead of her. Suddenly, in an instant, everything changes forever. A loud crash shattered glass, then silence. Alexa Bartell had become the random victim of a brutal thrill kill, her bright future stolen by a senseless act of violence that would shock her entire community. This is the story of a heinous crime, a family's heart-wrenching loss, and a town's quest for justice. A Shattered Piece. April 19, 2023 seemed like an ordinary evening in Jefferson County, Colorado. But under the cover of darkness, evil was about to strike on the quiet roads. At 10:15 p.m., Uber driver Nathan Tipton was cruising down Highway 93 during his usual shift. Out of nowhere, an explosive sound shook his car. Glancing over, he saw his driver's side windows blasted to pieces. Rattled, Nathan pulled over and called 911 to report the frightening incident. He had no idea he had just become the first target in a sinister spree. Just a half hour later, 20-year-old Alexa Bartell was making her way home from work, laughing and talking on the phone with a friend like any other night. In a flash, their cheerful conversation was cut short by a deafening crash, followed by an eerie silence. Alexa's friend grew concerned when she didn't reply. As soon as her shift ended at 11:05 p.m., she decided to track Alexa's iPhone location, desperately hoping her friend was okay. The brutal discovery. Following the digital trail, Alexa's friend soon faced a waking nightmare. She came upon Alexa's yellow Chevy Spark wrecked in a ditch along Highway 128. Peering through the shattered windshield, she saw Alexa slumped motionless in the driver's seat, her body bloody and still. Fighting shock, she dialed 911 and made a tearful call to Alexa's mother to share the horrific news. Broomfield police officers were first on the grisly scene. They found Alexa battered and pulseless, a gaping hole in her windshield, blood pooling from a massive head wound. Tragically, paramedics pronounced the young woman dead on arrival, her life cut short by an unknown assailant. Investigators immediately recognized this was no simple car crash. Damage analysis by Colorado State Patrol made a chilling determination some kind of heavy object had violently smashed through the windshield from outside, brutally striking Alexa in the head. At the scene, detectives discovered an ominous clue. A large, blood-stained rock weighing nearly 5 pounds, bigger than a softball. Preliminary forensic tests detected Alexa's blood on the crude weapon, all but confirming she was deliberately attacked and killed by someone hurling the boulder at her moving vehicle. But who would commit such a random, ruthless act? And for what reason? As police widened their search, a disturbing picture emerged. Alexa was not the only victim that night. Over a mere 2-hour span, a total of 7 vehicles were maliciously attacked across the area. 2 other drivers sustained minor injuries from shattered glass, with 5 cars total having front windshields bashed in. Alexa's case was the final and fatal blow in what appeared to be a shockingly coordinated series of attacks. Community united in grief. Word of the disturbing crime spree spread quickly through the tight-knit community. Residents were horrified and outraged that such a vicious, senseless attack could happen in their quiet hometown. Alexa's family and friends were overwhelmed by grief at the loss of such a bright, kind young woman who had her whole life ahead of her. As shock turned to anger, the community galvanized around a single mission: to find Alexa's killer and bring them to justice. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office sprang into action alongside the Boulder County Sheriff, Arvada Police, and Westminster Police. Detectives worked around the clock chasing down leads, while forensic teams processed the crime scenes. They pulled surveillance videos and cell tower data, searching for any clue to identify the perpetrators. Suspects unmasked. A major break finally came on April 25th, less than a week after Alexa's murder. A tipster named Joseph Bob came forward claiming to have key information. In police interviews, Bob revealed a chilling story. On the evening of April 19th, Bob's former co-worker, 18-year-old Joseph Koenig, invited him to hang out. Arriving at Koenig's house, Bob met up with Koenig and 2 other young men, Mitch Carroll Chick and Zachary Quack, both also 18. The group piled into Carroll Chick's black Chevy Silverado pickup truck and started cruising around town. They eventually pulled into a Walmart parking lot. When Bob returned from a restroom break, he was shocked to find the other 3 grabbing landscaping rocks from the lot's perimeter and filling up the truck's back seat. Bob estimated they loaded up as many heavy stones as they could carry. A disturbing revelation. Sensing the teens had malicious plans for the rocks, Bob became extremely uncomfortable. He knew Koenig had a history of vandalism and property damage, and seemed to get a thrill out of destruction. But fearing Koenig's volatility if confronted, Bob stayed quiet. As the truck started moving again, Bob demanded to be taken home, wanting no part of their dangerous scheme. The other 3 reluctantly dropped Bob off before continuing on their mission. Bob's information gave investigators the first real lead detailed descriptions of 3 possible suspects and the vehicle used in the attacks. With this tip, the police honed in on Koenig, Carol, Chick, and Quack. The very next day, a SWAT team swept in and arrested all 3 teens at their Arvada homes. The 18-year-olds, all local high school seniors, were hauled in for questioning. Carol, Chick, and Quack eventually gave statements, while Koenig lawyered up and remained silent. Confessions and accusations. Carol Chick admitted to a disturbing history of thrill-seeking violence. He and Koenig had made a pact as blood brothers to throw rocks at random cars in the past, just for twisted fun. He confessed they all gathered rocks that night, but claimed Quack was the one who threw the fatal blow that killed Alexa. Quack confirmed he was in the truck that night and participated in the attacks, but insisted he wasn't the killer. He said he impulsively decided to join Koenig and Carol Chick's deranged scheme to drop rocks off overpasses. While Quack admitted to throwing some rocks himself, he accused Koenig of launching the large boulder that struck Alexa's vehicle. Quack described hearing a loud boom and a railgun-like sound as the rock shattered through the young woman's windshield. He said the force was so great, it sounded like a block of concrete had hit the car. The teens watched in shock as Alexa's car veered off the road and crashed, the driver almost certainly dead or gravely injured. Instead of calling for help, the trio made a chilling decision. Quack claims they all agreed to circle back to the crash site to take a memento photo of the wrecked car with Alexa's body inside. But he denied being the one to throw the fatal rock. As Carol, Chick, and Quack pointed fingers, Koenig remained tight-lipped. But the evidence increasingly placed him at the center of the crime. An arrest affidavit indicated Koenig was likely behind the wheel when the deadly attack occurred, meaning he was well positioned to throw the massive rock himself. Investigators also uncovered Koenig's disturbing social media history, which cast the attacks in an even darker light. Several people who knew Koenig came forward with an unsettling image he had posted on Facebook back in December 2022. It showed Koenig posing with a motorcycle sticker that read, "Just killed a woman feeling good." The quote seemed to come from a popular gaming YouTuber named TommyInit, who said the line while playing Minecraft. But given the timing, Koenig's post took on a disturbing foreshadowing of the very real murder he would later be accused of. Police also discovered Koenig and Carol Chick's blood brother, oath to stay silent if they were ever caught. And just one day after Alexa's death, Koenig secretly met up with Quack to coordinate their stories and denial of involvement if questioned. But the determined investigators built an overwhelming case, tying all 3 young men to the vicious crime spree that turned deadly. In May 2023, the trio was hauled before a judge to face charges, including murder. Staring ahead stoically with their hands cuffed, each teen was slapped with a slew of extremely serious charges for their alleged actions that night. Nicholas Carol Chick, Joseph Koenig, and Zachary Quack were all accused of the same 13 crimes. These included 1 charge of first-degree murder for killing Alexa Bartell. There were also 6 charges of trying to murder other people in the attacks. On top of that, they faced 3 charges each of second-degree assault and attempting first-degree assault with the rocks. Together, the charges conveyed the gravity of the teens' actions, a callous disregard for human life with deadly consequences. If convicted, they could face life behind bars for cutting short Alexa's bright future in such a cruel, senseless way. At the court hearing, only Carol Chick showed any visible unease, looking shaken as he exited. Quack mostly stared ahead blankly. But Koenig, the alleged ringleader, smirked to his lawyer at times, his demeanor unchanged. All 3 were jailed without bond while awaiting their trial. As news of the arrests spread, it sent shockwaves through the community. Neighbors and classmates were stunned to learn the quiet teens in their midst were accused of such a heinous act. Some who knew Koenig said they weren't entirely surprised, citing past instances of troubling behavior. But few could conceive of an evil so random and reckless. Community mourns. While the arrests brought some resolution, the community continued to reel from the profound loss of Alexa Bartell. Family and friends remembered the vivacious 20-year-old as an incredibly bright light, a young woman of deep faith and compassion who lived life to the fullest. Alexa had been thriving in her job at a flooring company and was deeply in love with her girlfriend. She had a tight-knit family and countless friends who adored her joyful, uplifting spirit. Her senseless death left a void that could never be filled. As the legal case against Koenig, Carol, Chick, and Quack slowly ground on, the community rallied to honor Alexa's life. Candlelight vigils, fundraisers, and memorial rides were held in her name. An outpouring of support lifted up the Bartell family as they faced every parent's worst nightmare. Loved ones vowed Alexa's death would not be in vain, but rather a catalyst to spread more light in the world, as she had always done. The story of Alexa Bartell is a harrowing reminder of the fragility of life and the senseless cruelty that can strike in an instant. Her shocking murder reverberated deeply, shattering her family and an entire community. While her loss cut short a promising future, Alexa's legacy endures through the countless lives she touched and the lessons of love and resilience she leaves behind. As the suspects await their fate, the community comes together to ensure justice is served. But most of all, they unite in remembering Alexa, celebrating the brilliant light she brought to the world during her vibrant 20 years. Through continuing to share her story and her joyful spirit, Alexa's light shines on. In our final case, we unearth the unsolved mystery of the River Thames torso. On September 25, 2001, IT consultant Aidan Minter was heading into town for a business meeting just like any other day. Little did he know that that day would be etched in his memory as a nightmare for years to come. As Aidan made his way across Tower Bridge into central London, he glanced towards the River Thames and noticed something floating. At first, it looked like a dummy, but as the tide brought the figure closer, he made a horrifying discovery. It was a human body. Aidan immediately called the police, who rushed to the scene and retrieved the dismembered body of a young dark-skinned male from the river. The police believed the body had been in the water for around 10 days, but his identity remained a mystery. Tests on the body revealing that he was between 4 and 7 years old at the time of death. The autopsy showed that the cause of death was a slit throat, and given the precision of the cuts to his head and limbs, he had been amputated expertly. Cough syrup was also found in the boy's system, raising several questions. Had he been drugged? Was he sick? Did this contribute to his death at all? With the body's identity still a mystery, the boy was dubbed Adam by the police. A £50,000 reward was offered for any valuable information that could lead to solving the crime. Despite efforts, nobody came forward with credible leads. The details of this murder case were chilling and immediately raised suspicions of a ritualistic killing. Experts concluded that it resembled muti killings seen in southern Africa, where traditional healers used body parts for various purposes like medicine or charms for wealthy individuals. Following this line of inquiry, the Metropolitan Police took their investigation to South Africa in an attempt to uncover the truth behind this gruesome crime. Former President Nelson Mandela even appealed to the South African citizens to come forward and assist the UK police in solving this mystery. Again, these efforts failed to yield any results, suggesting perhaps that this event wasn't specific to South Africa. It was soon established that the dismemberment was not consistent with the muti ritual killings, and further investigation would shift the police focus to the western part of the continent, as evidence would suggest the death was more in line with the depraved occurrences of human sacrifice reportedly practiced by some in Nigeria. Things were taking a dramatic turn. In July 2002, social workers in Glasgow grew concerned about the safety of 2 girls who were living with their mother, Joyce Ossagitt. When council workers visited her home, they discovered what they considered strange ceremonial objects. During a court hearing to protect the children, Joyce shared a chilling story about cults, killing, and sacrifices. This caught the attention of an observant police officer, who promptly contacted the homicide unit in London. DS Nick Chalmers then searched Joyce's home and made a shocking discovery. He found clothes with the same Kids and Company label, and in the exact sizes as Adam's orange shorts. This raised enough suspicion to justify Joyce's arrest. The officers were convinced Joyce was vital to the story, but she seemed confused, and her account kept changing. She insisted that she knew nothing about Adam, but couldn't explain the coincidence with the clothes. Without any evidence to charge her with a crime, she was eventually released, bringing investigators back to square one. A whole year passed after Adam's murder, and in September 2002, a memorial service was held at London's City Hall to honor Adam's life. It was a solemn and heartfelt gathering, with around 30 police officers, pathologists, and other experts involved in the case. Seeing people paying tribute to someone whose identity was still unknown was a beautiful display of empathy and honoring of a restless soul yet to receive justice. The Metropolitan Police did not give up, and more forensic work was done on Adam's DNA. In December 22, it was confirmed that he did indeed have West African ancestry, specifically from a region around Benin City in southern Nigeria, which coincidentally is Joyce Ossage's hometown. The pollen samples found in Adam's gut were also quite revealing. They indicated that Adam had only been in the southeast of England for a short period, possibly just days or weeks, before his tragic death. Furthermore, in Adam's stomach, the investigators found an unusual substance made of African river clay. It had vegetation, ground bone, and even traces of gold and quartz. The ash suggested the mixture had been burned before Adam ingested it. A month prior to these new DNA revelations, Joyce Osage ended up being deported after her asylum application was rejected. Detective Inspector Will O'Reilly and his boss, Nick Chalmers, accompanied her on a private jet to Nigeria. They were hoping that during the flight, she would open up and reveal crucial information about the murder. Unfortunately, she didn't say a word. The detectives didn't even step off the plane when they landed in Lagos. And after that, Joyce vanished into thin air. At the time of Osage's initial arrest, they discovered that she only had 2 contacts in her phone. One was a man named Moussa Kamara, who was traced to a house in London. When officers searched his house, they found some peculiar items: an animal skull punctured with a nail, liquid potions, and small packets containing what seemed to be sand or earth. They even came across a videotape labeled Rituals, which showed a drama involving an adult man being beheaded. These items appeared to be associated with rituals, popularly known as juju. Interestingly, the detectives figured out that Moussa Kamara's real name was Kingsley Ojo. However, since there wasn't substantial evidence directly linking him to Adam's murder, he was released on bail. The police had their suspicions about Ojo's involvement in human trafficking, so they decided to keep a close eye on him. Within hours of his release, he was in contact with criminal associates, organizing the illegal entry of Nigerians into the UK, and over time it became clear that he was a major player in this people smuggling operation and went by several aliases. In July 2003, after months of surveillance, the police carried out coordinated raids at 9 different addresses across London, arresting a total of 21 men and women, including Ojo himself. In July 2004, the police had gathered enough evidence to charge Kingsley Ojo for people smuggling and using fake documents, but nothing to do with Adam's death. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 4 years in jail and was recommended to be deported upon his release. However, detectives still held hope that Ojo might still hold crucial information about Adam's death. Interestingly, while in Brixton prison, Ojo gained a reputation as a big man. And it was even reported that he performed juju rituals in exchange for money on behalf of other prisoners. Now, remember the vegetation forensics had found in Adam's stomach? Well, in October 2003, On the request of the Metropolitan Police, botanists at Kew Gardens analyzed the plant remains found in Adam's gut, and their findings were mind-blowing. It turned out that Adam had ingested parts of two different plants. First, they found traces of the Calabar bean, also known as the Doomsday or ordeal plant, used in certain spiritual ceremonies in West Africa. In small amounts, it causes paralysis but doesn't numb pain. They also discovered ground-up seeds from the Datra plant, which acts as a sedative and causes hallucinations. Detectives believed that this concoction was given to Adam before his throat was cut. Horrifyingly, it would have left him paralyzed and helpless, but still aware of what was happening to him. In 2005, things seemed to take a positive turn when, while in prison, Kingsley Ojo reached out to the investigation team regarding Adam's death. He claimed to have secret recordings of Joyce Osajid, which his associates in Nigeria had made. Ojo expressed his desire to help track down the killer and clear his name. After his sentence ended, and while awaiting deportation, Ojo was interviewed by the officers. He managed to convince the murder team that he could be of assistance. By late 2005, he was released and back in East London, seemingly aiding the inquiry. For more than 2 years, Ojo provided information to the police. On one occasion, he claimed that Miss Osajid was returning to the UK, but it turned out to be false information. Additionally, he accused another woman of leading the sacrificial ceremony in September 2001. Detectives went as far as placing an undercover officer in her church for months, but ultimately concluded that there was no basis for the claims. Finally, in December 2006, 5 years after the tragic incident, Adam's body was laid to rest in a London cemetery in an unmarked grave. The service was attended by a few dedicated police officers, including DS Nick Chalmers and Will O'Reilly, who were there from the beginning. As for Kingsley Ojo, he ultimately proved to be unreliable. It turned out he was still using a false identity and involved in benefit fraud even after his release from prison. In 2008, he was deported back to Nigeria. During his deportation hearing, Ojo claimed he had always done his best to aid the investigation. Meanwhile, Joyce Osajid reappeared in Nigeria and was interviewed by the police. She finally admitted to looking after Adam when she lived in Hamburg, Germany, and even confessed to buying the orange shorts found on his body. However, she didn't provide any further information and vanished once again. The mystery continued to deepen. After years of searching, the team finally found someone in Germany who knew Joyce. A social worker, Ria Manz, met Joyce and her 2 girls in Hamburg. Most pivotally, she even remembered seeing Joyce with a young boy in the summer of 2001 who could have been Adam. According to Ria, the boy was timid and introverted. He would stay in one spot and not move around much. Joyce treated him as a necessary evil, dragging him along and not wanting to let him out of her sight. In 2011, the investigators made a surprising discovery. They found many photos among Joyce Osajid's belongings in Germany, and one featured a boy who looked around 5 years old. Detectives could not be certain that this was Adam, and as one might expect a decade on, a new team had taken over the case. The photo was publicized on ADV News, who also attempted to locate Joyce in Nigeria. When they managed to contact her, Joyce confirmed that the boy in the photo was Adam, and his real name was in fact Ikpemosa. She claimed to have cared for him for a period of time before giving him to someone named Bawa. After retiring from the Met, Nick Chalmers and the team traveled to Benin City in Nigeria to meet Joyce. They found her living in a small house in a run-down neighborhood. Although she seemed pleased to see them, she appeared confused at times and was apparently suffering from mental health problems. Here's where things get more complicated. Joyce completely backtracked on her previous claim and insisted that the boy in the photo, thought to be Adam, was a boy named Danny, who they were later able to track down in Hamburg, alive and well. But the most shocking revelation came when they showed Joyce another photo. she instantly recognized the man as Bawa, the person she claimed to have given Adam to in Germany in 2001. The photo turned out to be of trafficker Kingsley Ojo, firmly establishing their connection and his possible involvement. The team managed to track Ojo in Nigeria, but he refused to meet in person. However, he agreed to talk on the phone and adamantly denied any involvement in Adam's murder. Since 2013, the investigation into the mysterious murder of Adam has been classified as a cold case, with no significant leads having come forward. It also came to transpire that Joyce, perhaps the most crucial potential witness, had since passed away. Nobody involved in this chilling case left unscathed. Aidan Minter, the consultant who discovered Adam's body in the river, was diagnosed with acute post-traumatic stress disorder, and the case still haunts retired detective Nick Chalmers. 23 years on, there is no closure, though a deeply sad conclusion can be made for certain. A family somewhere is missing a family member who was brutally murdered, mutilated, and dumped in a river thousands of miles away in London, and here his remains are buried. Whether justice will ever come to pass someday, one can only hope. This was Agent Magpie, and remember guys, be good. And if you can't be good, be careful.